Off. Oh, Elizabeth's going. Go, Elizabeth. Brilliant. Right, so we're recording. So welcome to Active Travel Cafe. We're going to do. My name is Steve Connor. I'll be facilitating this evening. We're shortly going to do a quick roundup of what's been going on across the UK, any developing news stories, any feedback from schemes or projects or things that are happening in the area. Bob's in already with his hand up, ready to go. Love it, Bob. Absolutely. So Speedy Gonzalez, and then we've got our speaker this evening, Didi Egerton-Warburton, really exciting economist who's going to talk about policy, economics, how we can move forward as a sector. Really exciting to hear all about that. But Didi will be with us at the moment, in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd just like to see if we've got any news from around the UK. Bob, you are first to go.
Hi, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, can we can do Bob, go for
Righty
it.
hi. Okay, so good news and bad news. Bad news is that Road Peace National Road Crash Charity has ceased to exist for primarily economic reasons. I got involved with them about 34 years ago, and there have been various issues about why they folded and what was involved with regard to road damage reduction. I'll be commenting on that on our blog post. And also, just to blow my own trumpet with regard to the road safety strategy, there's a whole page in Local Transport Today, Transport Extra, which is always worthwhile subscribing to and looking at, in which I'm pleased to see that they gave the Road Danger Reduction Forum's comments a particular large amount of space. So, on the if you don't blow your own trumpet, nobody else will basis, that's it.
Brilliant, Bob. Trumpet well blown and deservedly blown, so we love it. Nice one. Thanks, Bob. Andy Kelly in Wiltshire, do you want to come in?
Yeah, hi. Hopefully you can all hear me. Um,
Yes, we can.
yeah, a couple of things. First one, some of you may have heard that one of the most prominent cargo bike delivery companies, Pedal and Post, based in Oxford, has ceased trading, which is incredibly sad news. Not entirely sure the full reason. I think they had a big contract cancelled at short notice, so that's not great news. And also, I seen a few of the active travel England settlements come out in the last few days. Here in Wiltshire, I've been told we've got a paltry 169k, which is almost 100 times lower than similar sized counties who have a capability rating one up from us. We've got an enormous one rating here in Wiltshire. I saw Suffolk, I think was the one I was looking at, got £12 million over 4 years, and they've got a capability rating of two. So yeah, we've got work to do in Wiltshire. We're trying, but it's quite frustrating.
Thanks, Andy. Great. And next up, Robin, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that Andy. Yes, so I'm from just south of Oxford. Pedal and Post, indeed, they report they lost the contract with Voi scooters. They did a lot of work repositioning Voi scooters with cargo bikes, and so I guess we're just hopeful that somebody else using cargo bikes takes on some of that business and the employees. They were actually a good employer. They employed their riders and paid them Oxford living wage, which is above national typical well, certainly above minimum wage. The other news is I think I mentioned I did some analysis of injury reductions in our newer low traffic neighbourhoods. Of course, we've got ones going back many years. And that was picked up this week by BBC Radio Oxford. Also did some recording yesterday for BBC South Today, which is going out tonight. Would have gone out yesterday apart from Suella Braverman. And Greatest Hits Radio in Oxfordshire. It sounds like BBC Saturday have kind of, well, done a little bit of me and maybe one other talking about injury reduction in LTNs, and then lots of people ranting about how it adds a few minutes to their journey times to balance out the injury savings, which, in my view, and probably a lot here, are not quite comparable. But there we go. We'll see what it's like on South Today tonight. I'll put the analysis in the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. That's great. And for those of you who can, make sure you tune in to hear Robin's dulcet tones. Thanks, Robin. Brilliant stuff. H.
Yeah, just to catch up on this folding cargo bike stuff as well, and maintaining Voi bikes. The maintenance of Voi in Glasgow has been taken forward by Velogic. They formed out of a French company and Cycle Motion in Glasgow, which is linked to the cargo hub. So basically, local people are employed and trained up to do the maintenance, which is good because most of the local people know the wee niaffs who go and wreck the bikes. And so the Voi system is quite good in that respect. I'm quite interested to see that also Lime has displaced Beryl in Birmingham. So I need to contact Steve Pyer to find out what's going on there. It's very important, and what we had in bike hire is also should apply to last mile logistics. One of the things that killed Zedify and also has now killed Pedal and Post is the cutthroat market using gig riders who are basically modern slavery for ridiculously low rates to do the deliveries, which is why we get all the complaints about delivery. In Scotland, we have a legal thing which allows the council to license commercial use of the public road. So we've never had the same problem with bike hire littering the streets, because in order to operate a bike hire, you have to have a license where they set quite crucial terms and conditions. That's gone pretty wild west in England. And I think we need to find out some way of regulating the operators, both of bike hire, with terms and conditions that are punitive and they can lose their license. And likewise, all these gig economy last mile deliveries for food and also online orders, because they're employing cheap riders at ridiculously low rates. The deliveries are bad, the systems are bad, and there is no way back to the top of the chain of command. In other words, the various companies that are employing these people with no consequences. We need to regulate that market, commercial use of the public road by people using bikes.
Thanks, H. Point really well made and well put. And I saw quite a lot of nodding on the screens in front of me there. Loads of people agree with you. Brilliant stuff. Thanks, H. Tim.
Two bits, both I think quite good news. I went to a lecture on urban renewal last Sunday of Leicester in the 70s, 80s and 90s, general improvement areas, housing action areas. And at some point, the lecturer, 90-year-old Ned Newitt, said, oh, and then we had a woo-nerf. And I thought, oh, blimey, I've heard that word on Active Travel Cafe, a woo-nerf. And we have one woo-nerf in Leicester, installed in 1985 in Bartholomew Street. No, Worthington Street, sorry, in Highfields. I will send you the paper in the chat. But if you go on to Apple Maps, it's a block of terrace streets. So every street is a straight line, fairly obviously, a bit like the ladder in Green Lanes and all of that. And all the names on the streets are also in a straight line, except on Worthington Street, where it goes wiggly, because that's the route of the traffic. It's absolutely brilliant. So that was nice. And then I do bikeability. 2 weeks ago on a Monday, we met a little boy in the school. He had a very heavy little bike, which his mum was furious with him because they bought it for him and he wasn't riding it. He didn't know how to ride. He was riding by the end of the session with me. And we finished in the school the following Thursday, and he was walking through the playground with his brand new bike. And mum was thrilled and he was thrilled. And it's just what we do the job for, isn't it? So another little radical on the roads.
Oh, Tim, that's lovely. And for anybody who missed the relevant episode of Active Travel Cafe, would you like to do a quick explainer on a woo nerf?
Where's Ruth Mayolkas when we need her? So I'm unmuted, yeah.
Yep.
It's instead of having 2 lanes of traffic in the street, there's one, but there's also chevron parking, and planters. So you have to go through a snaky route to get to the end of the street, and vehicles are guests rather than the owners of the street. If you go on Google Earth, you can see the cars still parked in their chevrons. It's great.
Amazing. Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, Tim. Great stuff. Okay, any other vital things to share before I bring Didi in? I think we might be there. I think we're all done with our news roundup, Didi. So it's over to you.
Thank you. Let's get the screen sharing going. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep, that looks great.
Good stuff. Okay, so I am Australian. You'll work that out soon enough. And I used to work in the Treasury in Australia. Since I've lived in the UK, I'm more cycling than economics, but this is something I wanted to offer to the community just about how an economist will think about policy making in the active travel space. There's a lot. This presentation used to be 2 hours long. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of policies, and hopefully in the Q&A I can sort of explain a bit more about how an economist approaches these sort of questions. So what makes a good policy and why I love to hate the cycle to work scheme? I just chose this one because it's one you're familiar with, and I've hated it since I first heard about it. The cycle to work scheme was introduced to promote healthier journeys to work and reduce environmental pollution by encouraging people to commute to work by bike. It involves the provision of a benefit in kind that takes advantage. Sorry, I'm missing half of my presentation because of all your faces. I just need to reduce this a bit. Involves provision of a benefit in kind that takes advantage of a tax exemption. It's only available to employees through their employer, and it's not available to people who fall below the national minimum wage by participating in the scheme. The way the scheme works, because it's pre-tax income, it's very inequitable depending on how much you're earning. So here I've got a table comparing a low income earner and a high income earner and how they benefit from the cycle to work scheme. So if your income is £35,000 a month, your tax saving through the cycle to work scheme is £35,000 a year, we wish. Your tax savings through the cycle to work scheme are £560. After 12 months, you pay £140 to purchase the bike, and your percentage saving overall on a £2,000 bike is 21%. For someone in a high income tax bracket, your overall tax savings are £940, and after the same £140 purchase, you're only paying £1,200 and making a 40% saving on the purchase of a £2,000 bike. So because savings under cycle scheme depend on the buyer's marginal tax rate, a low income earner pays £380 more for the same bike than compared to a high income earner. So who benefits from this cycle to work scheme? It only targets people who cycle to work, so 50% of the cycle's use must be made for qualifying journeys. Another really big problem with the scheme is that it's unenforceable. There's really no way to measure if someone is complying with this 50% rule. And say you enjoy cycling and you want to start riding on the weekend, do you need to buy a separate bike once you hit your 50% threshold? So really, implicit in this scheme is, unfortunately, a little bit of dishonesty. It relies on a tax exemption to deliver a financial benefit, which, as an economist, I think using the tax scheme is a very, very inefficient way to deliver any scheme. And of course, it's only available if your employer is going to participate. So cycle scheme favours people who have a permanent full-time contract and a high marginal tax rate. But the people who are most likely to respond to cycle scheme in the way it's designed would be people who have low incomes, limited alternatives to a private vehicle, irregular hours or commutes at a time when public transport is less frequent, for example, if they have shift work, and people for whom it's reasonable to expect they could cycle to work. Cycle scheme also excludes a lot of people because it focuses on journeys to work, firstly, it excludes some people who could cycle to work but can't access cycle scheme, which we've discussed. Secondly, some people could cycle but not to work, for example, carers and retirees. Cycle scheme is actually, I think one of the worst things about it is it's got a real gender bias in it because it doesn't address a prominent barrier to cycling, which is safety, especially for women. And in a lot of respects, it's unnecessary because some people who use cycle scheme could afford a bike without the subsidy and would instead buy a cheaper bike that's just as suitable. So for high income people, it's actually prompting them to overspend on a bike. So as the cycle scheme is currently designed, is it any surprise that the main beneficiaries of cycle scheme are high income and white and men and from London? And this was actually when I first heard about cycle scheme, I thought that would be the case, and it took me a long time to find the data for it. But this evaluation of the scheme shows that users are more likely to be men from a white ethnic background. They're most likely to live in London, and 3 in 10 were higher rate, or 30% are higher rate taxpayers, compared to 16% of the UK population. So cycle scheme exacerbates the gender pay gap, the north-south and urban-rural inequalities in infrastructure, and DEI inequalities. I know I'm killing a sacred cow here because people love cycle scheme, and when I say this, a lot of people will say, but I bought a bike on cycle scheme and I ride it to work. But so what? For cycle scheme to be a good policy, you would have to be a person who would not have cycled otherwise. So cycle scheme is the thing that made you start cycling to work. You would have to be unable to afford, with after-tax income, a bike that is capable of making the trip. And you would have to continue to cycle to work, like stick to that change in choice of transport, even when other cheaper or more convenient options become available. And again, targeting, it would have to be unavailable to people who do not cycle to work. Cycle scheme also has some distortionary effects that are starting to be talked about more now. It favours larger retailers who are willing to bear the administrative burden of the scheme, so small and independent bike shops are missing out. It discriminates against small UK producers who make fantastic bikes that are really suitable for UK commuting conditions, but who don't have access to cycle scheme. As I've discussed, it encourages overspending on bikes among those who can access the scheme, but doesn't really fix affordability for those who can't. And it distorts the second-hand bike market. So for someone who bought a bike without using cycle scheme, when they go to sell it, they're competing against people who paid up to 40% less for the same bike that they're also selling. So the second-hand market is actually depressed. Sorry, too many clicks. So we know that cycle scheme is widely abused, and we know that the greatest beneficiaries of that abuse are high-income men spending pre-tax income on high-end bikes that they may not ride to work. But unfortunately, tax concessions like this, especially those that are accessed by the middle class, are quite difficult to get rid of. So are we stuck with cycle scheme? I think you can see when it was floated that cycle scheme might be changed, there was a real uproar. Because it's a handout, they're very difficult to counsel, and that's another reason why handouts like this are not good policy. So what my suggestion here would be, let's try and get cycle scheme to stop crowding out policies that will do a better job. If we're talking about affordability, we could better target it at people who face affordability challenges and remove access for those on high incomes. And I think, again, we really need to focus on what's really stopping people from cycling, which is like having good segregated infrastructure and working on safety. So if we think about how do we make a better goal, really, like if you look at cycle scheme as a whole, I think the goal is to reduce private vehicle use. And instead of buying everybody a bike or subsidizing bikes, let's think about what's stopping people from switching away from private vehicle use. As I said, infrastructure and perceptions of safety consistently outweigh cost as a barrier to cycling, especially among women. And I've got some references for that will be in the slides I'll share. And if you look even at the most recent Active Travel and Social Justice report, it doesn't mention once that women specifically are a group that face barriers to cycling because of their perceptions about safety. And while Cycle Scheme does address affordability, it doesn't do it in a very effective way. I think one of the positives in this evaluation of Cycle Scheme was that people said they enjoyed being able to pay for a bike over a long period of time. But in those cases, bike shops, for a lot less than the cost of Cycle Scheme, could offer 0% interest, like long-term loans and things. So the affordability can be addressed much more cheaply than Cycle Scheme is managing to do it. Another way I would evaluate the policy is to say, okay, we've identified the barriers and we've got some money, but we can't spend, we don't have infinite money. So where do we spend the money? So of the barriers that have been identified, which ones can be addressed cost effectively, delivering the most benefit to the most people? And that would be better infrastructure in high demand areas. And we can see that that's really working in London. There's a concentration of uptake of Cycle Scheme in London where there's good infrastructure, so people will want to cycle to work. And alternatively, if we're not looking at being cost effective, let's think about being equitable. Of the barriers that have been identified, which ones can be addressed equitably, delivering the most benefit to the least advantaged people? And that would be better infrastructure in areas where affordable alternatives, such as public transport, are not available. Cycle Scheme doesn't deliver on either of these. And my other problem with Cycle Scheme is I think it's the only active travel policy I'm aware of that doesn't have a price cap on it. So where budgets on lots of other policies are being reduced, Cycle Scheme effectively has an unlimited budget because it's delivered through the tax system. Just on this slide, I'm only going to talk about the last point, because one of the examples I saw was a family that used Cycle Scheme to buy a cargo bike, and after using it for 6 months, realized that really they no longer needed their second car. So they purchased a subsidized cargo bike, and then they sold their car, let's say for £5,000. They pocket the £5,000, and really with the £5,000, they could have bought the Dutch cargo bike. And the reason why they wouldn't have made that decision immediately is, well, we don't know if the cargo bike is going to work. So instead of delivering a subsidy through Cycle Scheme, a cheaper way to do it would be something like a library or a lease where you can try the purchase. And if you see, actually, I can have a bike or a cargo bike instead of a car, you can afford to sell the car and buy your own bike without a subsidy. So sometimes we assume that the hesitancy to spend the money is about affordability, but actually it might be about your attitude towards risk. And we can fix risk with things like leases and libraries. Generally, my frustration with policy discussions is, we should pay people to do the good thing. It's expensive, it's costly to administer. Positive rewards generally shift behavior less than negative inducements, and they're politically difficult to cancel once they're in place. And for an economist, giving people to money who cycle and taking money from people who drive are the same thing. Politically, it's more difficult to try and take money from people who drive, but actually it's more effective. So this is an example I took from Blue Sky, as narrated by someone. So he was telling a story about some car owners he knew in London. They had an old Saab that they loved. They'd lived in London their whole lives and they drove everywhere. So although they lived in London, their kind of sphere of travel was limited to what they could reach by car. They turned 60 and they were eligible for free public transport. Then the Eulers was expanded to where they lived, and they realized it was going to start costing them money to drive their car in London. So they started to use public transport. And then they discovered that actually using buses and underground, they could explore parts of London that they'd never been to before because they couldn't reach them by car. And suddenly their experience of living in London was transformed. And the way this person told the story was public transport should be free because it was the free public transport that got everyone moving. But what I heard, because if you look at at what point did they actually shift their behavior, because the public transport was always there, it's road user charging that actually made them sit down and think about their decisions. Um, user pricing pays. And I'm going to wrap up quick soon, but I just want to knock off a few other policy proposals that often come up. One is we should use the revenue from taxing the bad thing and spend it on the good thing. And the problem with that is if the revenue collection works, then your revenue stream will dry up. And then you're going to have to go back to Treasury and say, oh, we need money for this thing again, because we're, if we start introducing traffic fines and enforcing them more strictly, there's a lot of money available. But if you say, well, that should go to enforcement, what happens once drivers' behaviour changes? It's very difficult to then go to Treasury and say, no, we need additional money. And also, while I would love more to be spent on enforcement, there might actually be other things in the economy that need the money more. It also, if you have an organisation that is directly going to receive the revenue from enforcement, they're going to start over-policing that thing at the expense of others. Like domestic violence and burglary are not going to be revenue positive, and so they could be neglected, and that would also be a very bad outcome. And again, if there is a financial incentive for the regulatory agency, then they can start to over-enforce or lean on biases in enforcement. So while it's a very attractive idea, like, oh, we need money and there's this bad thing happening and we should charge people for the bad thing, it's actually a bad idea in policy terms. So to summarize, as an economist, I would want to make it expensive to do the thing you don't want people to do, remove the frictions that make it harder for people to do the thing you want them to do. Don't try to be perfect. I think if you can make small improvements at the margin, you build a lot of political favour. And the most difficult but most effective thing is to put a direct price on negative externalities, which, for example, would be congestion charging and extra charges on large and/or noisy vehicles. So I have some more things to discuss, but at this stage, I just want to talk to you guys and hear where you're at and maybe answer some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Didi. That was excellent. I don't know about everybody else. I'm slightly embarrassed to say after that annihilation of the cycle to work scheme, I never realized it was so deeply evil and wrong. And so kind of maybe it's just me and I'm just exposing myself as being hopelessly stupid and naive, but blimey, that was well, thank you, Didi. That was a real eye-opener for me. Just a quick question. We've got lots of questions in the Q&A actually. So, oh my God, yeah, it's blown up a little bit, the Q&A, Didi. So brace yourself. We're going to go through all these. But a quick question from me. So that policy of free stuff, if it's good, and then it's not necessarily good, because last year somebody shared with me the fact that they'd done the modelling, and if we gave free public transport to the under 21s, it would pay for itself in about 3 years in terms of increased revenue when they were over 21 and stopping them getting into the habit of becoming car drivers at 18, which I thought was really interesting. I'd never really thought about that before. From your analysis, do we need to think about free bikes? Would that cause as much chaos and harm as it would fix in terms of better outcomes?
I don't think free bikes is the answer, because I think you need to look at like what drives the individual's transport choice, and private vehicle use will win as long as it's more convenient and not significantly more expensive than the alternatives. I think we should the quickest way to a general equilibrium we want is just to charge for private vehicle use. And the only way to get people on bikes is to make the alternatives less favourable. And I think in places where they have done free public transport, it sort of tends to crowd out other things like cycling as well. Like I know I was in Canberra last year, and they made public transport free while they were doing some major works. And actually the people making the most use of it were people who normally cycled.
Yeah.
So
Not helping. Not helping.
it doesn't
Well,
it doesn't help. No.
Didi, let me get into some of the Q&A that we've got here. So we've got a statement rather than a question from Chris Gill from Darlington. But you feel free to comment on it. Cycle scheme is currently designed adversely affects people earning national minimum wage. You've already talked about that. And once monthly payment is deducted from the salary, it takes some of those people under the national minimum wage, meaning that the employer won't or can't allow them to buy a bike under the scheme. And he's familiar with people, with a number of people working in the public sector in that position. I think that's exactly what you said, isn't it? It's just somebody reaffirming from, from lived experience that you're absolutely spot on. I'll go to the first question, then you can go back to Chris's statement as well. Andy, who we heard from earlier in Wiltshire, I'm one of those people that purchased a cargo bike on the Cycle to Work scheme, and I've reduced car usage considerably in rural Wiltshire, where James cleverly said this week, everyone outside London needs a car. There you go. I do agree that the current scheme has a lot of inequality. Could a simple VAT exemption for all bikes and road legal e-bikes, including cargo bikes, solve some of those issues? So could we just take off the VAT?
I'm not an expert on that. I'm going to be careful about staying in my lane. I think that if we're talking about does the VAT stop people from being able to afford a bike? I'm going to sound mean because I'm going to say I think that most people should buy their own bike. Is it going to take them too long to save it up, to save up for that bike, or too long to pay for it? And there I would start looking at some different options about financing. But you really, when you're spending money like that, you just need to be able to target it correctly. I think generally it's going to be difficult for me to answer a lot of questions about how to finance bike purchases. I can do it at a broad level, and then to do it at a deeper level, I would probably need a bit more time and to understand it better.
No, that's fine. We definitely won't grill you to answer questions you can't get over. We've got a couple here. We've got somebody asking just out of interest, and it might be that somebody else knows and not you, but how much does the cycle scheme actually cost the UK per annum? Have you covered that off?
I had that number. Kind of less than no. I'm not even going to guess.
I tell you what, challenge to somebody else. Find the figure, let us know in the chat, and we'll replay it for people. Start Googling or using your AI tool of choice immediately.
I think it's in that evaluation document that I referenced. But yeah.
Great. And would you say, somebody asked, would you say that the UK cycle scheme creates an environment where more people ride fancy bikes, which could in turn increase bike crime?
Definitely, I think people overspend on bikes. Interestingly, I have a friend who came from Germany to work at the University of Warwick. He's an economist. And I find all the Germans I know cycle regardless. And I introduced him to a friend who was selling a bike secondhand for £400, and he cycled to work on that bike for 3 years, which is a lot less, even in after-tax income, than most people spend through cycle scheme. So,
brilliant. And Helen Jones asked a question on whether you've looked at or have any stats on whether high car parking charges discourage driving. So going back to your point about using economic levers for discouraging the bad thing, have you ever looked at that?
Big fan. Love them.
Excellent stuff. Workplace parking levy by any chance?
Bring it on.
Excellent. Good. You're playing to the crowd now, Didi, I have to say. Right. Beth Barker-Stock has asked, I see Didi's point about hypothecating taxes. However, how about hypothecating income from workplace parking levies? These feel like a win-win. There we go. It's like it was meant to be. If the initial political obstacles can be overcome, feel like a win-win. What's your thought on that?
Much as I love it, I would prefer to have a community debate. Like a good example I saw was, I think, a borough in London that looked at the revenue forgone by having free parking for residents. And then they thought about, at the moment, we are effectively paying hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to offer free parking. Do we want to give up the free parking and have the money go into general revenue for the borough and spend it on something else? So again, I think I come from a country where voting is compulsory and I believe in participating in democracy. So what I would say is collect the money and then have a discussion about what matters to you as a community in determining how that is spent.
Brilliant. Thanks. And Rachel Wigington was well ahead of us on the workplace parking levy. Rachel, just out of interest, did you want to come back in on that? Because you've got quite a long question there. So just in terms of shaking it up, and you might want to come off mute and follow up on that question you posted in there. You don't have to, obviously, but if you want to.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to. So I bang on about all these remote employment sites and headquarters that get moved out of city centres, and we've got Next near us, very close to us actually, and they've just been given planning permission for yet another, God knows how many spaces for car park, tarmacking over fields. You know, they've done, I don't know how many they've done in the last few years, but it's just constant. There's always another application. The transport there is dire. They're messing about with travel plans. They're paying lip service to it. Actually, nobody holds them to account. And of course, they get away with it because people want the employment. So the district council, who's responsible for planning, just sort of sees it through. But I sort of think something like that, it needs to come from government now in terms of workplace parking, because the damage done locally and the people moaning and the environmental side of it, it's just appalling. It's just shocking, actually, that they get away with it. And I sort of think this is just one. We've got Caterpillar down the road as well. And this, again, the traffic impact we're sort of outside of Leicester, we're into the countryside, but the traffic is awful because of these big major employment sites. And you go to Caterpillar, and again, it's just vast, full of car parking for thousands of employees. And I've worked on business parks a long time over my lifetime, and they're all the same. They do very little to incentivize people to car share, because car sharing, I think, has got to be the number one thing for some of these remote sites, because you'll never get public transport out to them. It's just not feasible. Yeah. But I don't see, there's got to be an economic argument for it. It's just, I know it's a tricky thing, but it has to be done because the damage environmentally is awful. So I just wondered in terms of the economics, and we've seen it in Nottingham, and people love the trams there because the money's gone back into the trams, and the best best transport outside of London. What's the view?
Anything But Bikes has a good video where he visits a business park in the Netherlands, and it's you can cycle all the way, and there's regular buses, and there's like shuttles on site to move people around. So definitely it can be done. I think it's just a cultural thing in the UK. There is I could do another, if I had another 7 hours, I could take you through the whole thing.
It's probably the politics more than the economics that's getting in the way, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when I think about, journeys to work, I think about effectively we are paying a congestion charge because we're sitting in traffic. And we don't understand it as a congestion charge, but we are effectively, for an economist, you're paying if you have to get up earlier to go to work, you're paying if your journey is slower than it needs to be, you're paying if you need to maintain a vehicle to get to work and back. So there's all these ways where we're all bearing the costs, but because they're not coming out of our pocket, we don't see them. And I think the transition is very difficult, and people really resist that. But actually, once we got to a new equilibrium, we would wonder why we spent so long, why it took us so long to get there.
I think so. I think it's got to come because there's no answer, is there? There's no other way.
Interestingly, I live in JLR country, and so many cyclists work there.
Yeah. Well, I work in Warwick, so I know it.
Cycle to work.
Yeah, Warwick's quite good for cycling, actually. But it's these places that are just outside in the countryside. It's just, the only way is car sharing, really.
Brilliant. Right. So I'm going to go back to the questions, Didi. We've got Mark Nelson thinks really interesting topic. Would the same apply to vehicle salary sacrifice, which isn't talked about anywhere near as much as the cycle scheme, but for much higher values? I'm assuming your logic pans right
It's an
across.
absolute disaster. And I think, you know, for all that I criticize cycle scheme, I would say that the losses on salary sacrifice for vehicles are orders of magnitude bigger. And yeah, it's just perverse for the government to be on the one hand saying, you know, we're on the side of drivers. We want fewer, you know, we want to make journeys faster and smoother, and then giving these huge incentives to people to buy private vehicles.
Great. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple more from the Q&A, and then as long as they promise to be brief, H and Bob can come in. But Shane from Galway, is it not arguable that higher income white men may be an important demographic to socialize about cycling being a good thing, even at an unconscious level? So is this actually a kind of PR opportunity, I guess, Didi? I mean, what do you think?
This one's difficult because in my experience, all my high income white male friends buy a new bike every couple of years on cycle scheme, and not one of them cycles to work. They also salary sacrifice vehicles, and they don't show up to events like this. So much as I love them, I don't in my experience, and without saying anything about the lovely people assembled here, I kind of think that the carers and you know, the people doing short commutes and caring, people working part-time who need to get from one place to another, are the people who we really want to be helping out with access to cycling and cycling infrastructure.
Right, thanks, Didi. I've got a question from Wookie, but you're going to have to help me with the acronym. It's GCI. Do you happen to know what that GCI is?
No.
Wookie, are you there? Do you want to tell us what GCI? His question.
Green Cycle Initiative. It's a cycle scheme-like scheme, but it's a different one. But yeah, if you don't know about it, then the question is null and void, really.
I think so.
Can you tell me a little bit about what's the intention of the scheme?
Yeah, but I mean, it does exactly the same job as Cycle Scheme. It's a salary sacrifice thing for employees only, but it had different limits and it charged quite a lot less to the shops, so they liked it more.
Yeah.
So we switched, mostly because people wanted to buy £5,000 cargo bikes, and Cycle Scheme didn't cover that at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I was just wondering if there was any significant difference. I don't think there is.
Yeah, I think one of my big issues with cycle scheme is that it's unenforceable because you've got no control over whether people actually use the bike at all. I mean, they could just drive every day and just have the bike in the garage. So some more creative ways. I'm in Israel at the moment, and a policy, this was just a small trial, but this is the sort of trial that an economist would love, is that they gave people 1,000 shekels for a month, and every time they drove to work, they had to give up some of that money. So that's really what you want, because that is like you're attaching a penalty to using your car and making people really think about where they use it. And that you know, a lot of them would have cycled instead, which is what Cycle Scheme wants you to do, but at a much lower cost and with a direct impact on how often people choose to drive. Like I said, make it expensive to do the bad thing.
Just out of interest, Didi, I mean, this is like 20 years old. I remember one case study where people had got rid of the notion of free parking at a large employment site, but had converted it to basically a bursary payment for their commute that they could choose to spend in whatever way they wanted, which included the rental cost of that parking space. And it ended up in loads of them shifting over to more sustainable modes because it just seemed like throwing money away. Have you come across that?
Not that one directly, but yeah, it's the sort of thing that really works. It's like, look, without you being aware of it, we're spending money on this. Do you want that money? You can have it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we're sort of unaware of how much we're being induced to spend on cars when those things aren't priced.
Yeah. Amazing. Right. Okay. Well, if everybody promises to go super fast, H, I'll come to you. You can come off mute.
Yeah, sure. Lots of things to do. 30 years ago, I was working on something called EU Civitas, which was what I'm describing as total mobility. I've been using this for at least 2 decades. I use my bus pass to hire new electric cars 24/7 whenever I want them. My total motoring costs for the past 6 years are under £500, whereas the RAC Foundation reckons it costs you at least £6,000 a year to keep a decent car on the road. Employers' hospitals. I spent some time in an NHS hotel recently, and I observed the car park. It's empty overnight. Over 50% of the land on the hospital site is taken up by car parking, surface car parking, which costs them £500 a year per space to maintain, about £5,000, £6,000 to build, and it's full during the day with people parking on the footways, the ambulance bays, everywhere else. We need to look at travel as a resource. So an NHS hospital generates 30,000 to 50,000 trips per day, most of which are by car. The local NHS hospital I was using there is a station with 24 trains an hour from 6 in the morning till midnight, which is a 5-minute walk from the main entrance. But there is no way that there are people encouraged to walk to that station. And, everywhere I see NHS hospitals drowning in parked cars, spending a fortune on maintaining and running the car parks, when literally Borders Hospital, an example, they actually built it so the main bus route went past the main entrance of the hospital. And as a result, everybody waits for the bus in the WRVS tea room. And when the bus arrives, they step outside. So you have everything in the right place. A bus stop with Victualling, drinks and warmth, and nice seats. And then you just step outside and catch the bus when it pulls up outside the hospital. There's
Sounds
a lot
like the
we
right
can
solution,
do
Age.
to join up the dots. And I'm calling it total mobility.
Love
because,
it. Thanks, H.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut you off there, H.
Okay.
We know you too well. You could the
know.
monologue could continue for some time. Thanks, H. Didi, I'll come back to you in a minute. Let's hear from Bob and Robin, and we'll get 3 voices in, and then we'll come back to you. Bob, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. I think you've just frozen a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bob.
I've just lost my connection, I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bob.
Okie doke. Right. Sorry, yes. I put in the chat an article from our website about external costs and hypothecation. External costs, very, very important of motoring. They're quite massive and most people don't know about them. So it's worthwhile getting that out, the costs of crashes, the costs of everything else. The only problems with it are the problems of cost-benefit analysis, is that what is the cost of losing your child in a road crash? And then there are all sorts of complex moral issues about that. You have to be aware of that. The other thing you have to worry about is hypothecation, because drivers do have this idea they've paid for the road. And we really have to knock that out of the court. It's responsible for a lot of danger and aggression against cyclists. So I just want to say, be careful about hypothecation, be careful about external costs, but get across this idea that motoring is quite fantastically expensive in terms of what the costs are to society, and we need to address that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. Excellent contribution. And then finally, Robin, and I'll come back to you, Didi. Robin.
Yeah, this one is on the business parks, and it's a really interesting one. There's a business park just south of Oxford near Didcot called Milton Park. They have a really interesting planning condition. I think they call Grampian conditions on maximum motor traffic. They have vivacity sensors on all the entrances and exits. So they can build as much as they like, as many lab spaces as they like, as long as they limit the traffic. And so they've been really inventive in car sharing has been their biggest success. They have a £20 annual local bus pass scheme, which is popular. And they've actually been investing in local bike lanes, going off in different directions, working with the council to invest in bike lanes. So there you are. And they've turned car parks into more lab space, which of course they rent out and make money as a business park. So that is a useful story. I can hear Leicestershire taking notes, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. Does that mean that's I'm sorry, I'm going to come off the fence. There's something about business parks out of town that make my soul wither and die. But that sounds like it's not an evil one. So maybe that's a business park I might actually like to visit. Didi, lots of thoughts there. Did you want to come back in?
Thank you. Robin, I think you're making an interesting point that maybe businesses might be one of the groups to lead the way on this because government doesn't seem to have their head around it. And sort of, I think people accept economic arguments that are directly related to cost and choices more easily from business than from government. While I'd like to hear more of it from government, I can understand why they sometimes avoid it. So yeah, it really helps if you've got some businesses saying, look, this is the logical decision for us in terms not just of cost, but also employee welfare and freedom of choice.
Brilliant. Good. Have we got any more questions to Didi? That was honestly, there's lots of comments in the chat, Didi. I think we've all had a proper wake-up moment. Like, oh my God, the cycle to work scheme, it's a bad thing.
Hey, let the Economist in.
Honestly, when I put my tender little bottom on my Brompton seat that was paid for on the cycle to work scheme, I'm going to feel like a guilty, white, high earning, evil male.
Steve, please no, that's not what I wanted you to take away from this.
No, but, Adrian, did you want to come in before we wrap?
Yeah, just to say thank you so much, Didi. That was absolutely fantastic, and I really urge us all to think more about economics because that's how the decisions are actually made. You know, it's not about whether you think that this nice project is good or bad, or it actually comes down to the money. Sorry, I know that's an uncomfortable truth from somebody who worked in the city all his life, but that's what really matters. And if we just change the way in which we evaluate schemes properly and evaluate transport, as others have said, that will make a huge difference. It'll just make things we'll get much better decision making then at the government level. So we just need to think about economics and finance. Sorry, I know it's uncomfortable for us campaigners.
Well, Tim, I can see, Tim, I almost know what you'd say in response to that, Tim. I think we're probably on the same page about whether you can actually put a financial cost on literally everything. But no, brilliant point, well made, Adrian. I think it's been great, honestly, amazing deep dive. Have you got any closing thoughts? You said you'd spared us the full 7 hours. I dread to think what other policies you would have destroyed in front of our eyes if you'd given you that much time.
I did try to find something in Hansard that really had me throwing things at the computer. But no, thank you. It was a lot of fun for me to put this together, and I've really appreciated the audience. I would be very happy to come back. I've got more to say. And
excellent. We will do
appreciate the comments. So
Economics episode 2, we will do for sure. Well, listen, I think we're all done. That's been amazing. Such a great response from everybody. Thank you so much, Didi. Listen, everybody, we're going to wrap up just before 6. Can I just give a plug to next week? Make sure you join us. We've got Tony Lenihan from Leicester eCycles Project. Yes, Tim, it's a Leicester. I think do we overplay Leicester a little bit on Active Travel Cafe? It seems like it features all the time. It's like Bath and Bristol and Brighton. Brighton's always, honestly, we need more Manchester. So yeah, Tony's with us next week. Please make sure you join us then for another brilliant Active Travel Cafe. Thank you so much. Thank Elizabeth, Wilf. Thank you for helping, and have a lovely evening, everybody. Take care.